Hello boaters, this is another little video about stove safety. The other night I went to bed to read and I was reading away, then after about half an hour I suddenly noticed, oh, it's getting pretty hot in here. And then at that moment I remembered that before I'd gone to bed I'd put some fuel in the fire and opened the bottom door of the stove. And obviously I'd forgotten to close it again, and during that time the fire had got up and things were getting pretty hot. Luckily I was there and I noticed it, so I get out of bed straight away, go up to the stove, and yeah, it certainly was very hot. The black paint on the stove was starting to smell. The stove was making little creaking noises, so I caught it just in time. In this case all I needed to do was to close the bottom door of the stove and make sure the air controls were set correctly, and everything settled down quite nicely on its own. But I thought I need to do something to stop this from happening. It doesn't happen very often, but I have over the years I've forgotten to do this now and again. And if you're around, it's probably not too serious because you're going to realise how hot it's getting sooner or later. But all the same, you want to avoid it wherever possible. So I had a good think about what we could do, and I settled on the idea that what I needed was some sort of thermometer that would sound an alarm when it got to a certain temperature. So I looked around online, and normal, maximum, minimum thermometers with alarms, they wouldn't go hot enough. They went up to about 70 degrees Celsius. So then I had the idea, well, what about a meat thermometer used in cooking? So I looked those up, and yeah, there were several there, and they tend to go up to, they measure up to about 250 degrees centigrade, which I think is 400 something Fahrenheit. And they have, or some of them at least, have an alarm. You can specify a temperature and the alarm will go off when it reaches that temperature. I thought, that's ideal. I can fit that, put the sensor on top of the stove. If it overheats any time, it'll start beeping and let me know. So I looked online and I managed to find a meat thermometer which had a high temperature alarm. Very important that it's got a high temperature alarm. Not all of them have that. So that's what you do want to look out for. It could measure up to 250 degrees centigrade. So I ordered it and it came, and I'll show you it in a moment. It's almost perfect, but you do have to remember that this is a meat thermometer for cooking. It's not a life-saving device. It was never intended to do that. But as a backup, as something you can have on just for safety's sake, it's worth having. My only complaint with it is that the alarm is not very loud. If I was asleep, it probably wouldn't wake me up. But if I'm up and about and anywhere within a reasonable vicinity of the stove, I would hear it beeping away. Anyway, let's have a look at it right now. Well, here's my stove. It's very dusty. I'm not sure how well the GoPro is going to work indoors. It's not particularly light, but... And there's my... I don't know if that's not in focus, I'll switch it for a still image. But there is the little temperature alarm. The reading on the left is the measured temperature on the stove, and the reading on the right is the temperature that I can set the alarm to go off at. It's very simple. As you can see, there's a little wire coming out of it, which goes down behind that piece of wood, pops out, and let's go around the stove pipe here. And it's just on the top of the stove. Excuse all the dust. Stoves are dirty things. But yeah, it's just held down on the top, weighted down with the stove. There's the sensor at the tip. And yeah, the hottest part of the stove is normally going to be the top plate. In this case, the Morso Squirrel, the front of the top plate is going to be the hottest. Also maybe the bottom of the flue pipe. But I usually have kettles on the front here, so I've just put it down at about halfway. And the thing to notice is the temperature. Don't worry about absolute temperatures, because it'll depend on where you put the sensor. So don't get too hung up on actual temperatures that are measured. You want to place the sensor on a hot part of the stove, but just use the stove as normal and see what temperature it's recording. Typically with me, my normal sort of temperature is between 90 Celsius and maybe 105. That's fairly typical. Sometimes it's lower, sometimes it's higher. I've set the alarm to go off at about 140. Beyond that, that's when the paint starts to smell a bit on the stove. So under normal use, normal careful use, the alarm never goes off. It'll depend where you put the sensor as to what actual temperatures you're recording. So I can't say to you, set it at such and such degrees for safety, because it'll all depend on your positioning of the temperature gauge. So I've had this installed now for a couple of weeks. It's powered off a single AA battery, I think it is, and it's working all the time. It's monitoring the temperature, so it's quite good. And I was, I can, if I'm awake in bed, I can hear it just about going off. My only complaint, as I've said, is that it's very quiet. It's not. It's just more like a digital watch beeping away. If you shop around, you may well be able to find one with a much louder alarm. You may actually also be able to find specialized thermometers which are actually designed to do that, so they may be a better option, but that's likely to be a lot more expensive. But I think this is definitely a lot better than nothing, and already a couple of times I have forgotten to close the door whilst I've been in the boat, and it's given me a warning beeps, and I've come up and adjusted it. It's okay. Perhaps I'm getting a bit more forgetful as I get older, I don't know. It's just something that you can do just to bring you a little bit of extra peace of mind. But if you can, try and find one with a louder alarm. Anyway, I hope you found this little video helpful. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.